Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. You have stumbled on part one of our season 3 finale. I am so excited about our episode today. Today, our episode is with my counselor, my therapist, Dr. Thomas Petit. If you are familiar with the Wednesdays with Watson podcast, you've heard his name many times, and you also would have had the opportunity to hear his first appearance on this podcast of PTSD, Jesus and Me. So Dr. Thomas Petit, located in St. Petersburg, Florida, is a trauma-informed therapist as well as a life coach. As I mentioned, he is my counselor, and if you've heard any part of my story, you know that I have mentioned his name many times on the podcast. And so as we end this season on highlighting childhood trauma and how we can heal from that, I am sitting across a Zoom meeting, which will ultimately end up on YouTube and then on this audio, from a man who had dedicated his life to helping people, and simply I would not be alive without him. And so it was really, really important for me, and I'm so honored that he is here today. Before I introduce him formally, I do want to make sure that we give you an important disclaimer here. Dr. Thomas Petit is here for entertainment and educational purposes only. This does not equal therapy. If you are in need of therapy, we always put the show notes, links in the show notes for you to find that therapy. If you are in the state of Florida and you would like to reach out to Dr. Thomas Petit and maybe get into his intake program, if he has any room, I will provide that information in the show notes and you can take it from there. But with that being said, I'm so excited to welcome to the microphone Dr. Thomas Petit, who I lovingly call just Dr. P. So it feels weird saying your whole name, Dr. Petit. So welcome back to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. You're a little bit of a celebrity around here. So I'm so grateful that you would take time on a Saturday morning and do this for us.
I'm very honored and humbled, Amy, to participate in what you're doing. That is bringing help and hope to so many people. And it's just a privilege and a delight to get to share this time with you.
Well, I'm just, like I said, I'm grateful that the Lord provided a counselor for me back in 2007 when we weren't sure that I was going to be on this planet much longer. And it is because of the work that we've done that I'm able to do what I do. And so it's so neat to me how that trickle-down effect, how God is so faithful to for us just to pass it on. And that is my goal with the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. Just a little bit of housekeeping really quickly, though. I do want to say that Dr. Petit's office is one of the recipients of any scholarships that we give. They are set up to be able to do that as long as the patient is of consent with that. And our very first scholarship, in fact, was just that. And so that is really important here at the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. Well, let's just jump right in here. Dr. Petit, I told you when I sent you the notes for the interview that you don't get out of the first question, which I laugh every time I ask it, because people have said, of all the questions you sent to me, this has been the hardest one for me to answer. And I meant it as an icebreaker question, but it really has turned into this amazing question where people have had to dig deep and go, well, how do I answer this question? So my first question for you is, what is your favorite thing about how God made you?
So if I were to have answered that in younger years, it would have been my mind. He's gifted me with a good one. But currently, and I struggle to say this because it just doesn't feel comfortable to say it, but I would say my heart. Mm. Especially since he has chosen to continue to help that heart and grow that heart and heal that heart and open that heart and enlarge that heart. So it's a surprising answer, actually.
Surprised me. Yeah, I thought it was going to be the mind trap that is Dr. Pettit.
Right.
Yeah, I really did. But you had,
So,
yeah.
So Amy, when I ask you later to edit this, don't do it. Just
That's
realize
hilarious.
that, yeah, that's just
Well,
me being uncomfortable and saying, let's
and
go back.
that's the point. And it could be a conversation that you and I have much more frequently, is like, why is it difficult for us to say nice things about ourselves? You know, even a psychologist was like, I'm a little bit uncomfortable saying that. And so I think that we want to leave all of that, and edit it out, because I want people out there to know that if you struggle to find the favorite thing that God made about you, that we all do, even people with letters behind their names that have spent a career 30 plus years of sitting across the room from somebody and helping them. And so I love that answer. I really do. Well, as I mentioned, you are a little bit of a celebrity around here. I get messages all the time asking for your contact information. And what would Dr. Pettit say about this? And I'm like, I don't know. Why don't you call and make it an appointment? And so people are going to be so happy that you're on the podcast today. But this next question is a little bit selfish on my part, because I want to know, because I don't think I've ever asked you. But what made you want to be a counselor? What made you want to use that expanded heart and that amazing mind that you have to walk people through unimaginable pain? What was the impotence for that for you?
So, back in my middle 20s, take it a step back in my junior year in college, I was privileged to lead a couple of young men to the Lord, one named Rick, one named Greg, who were from the same hometown, and they were friends. And as I was discipling them, Greg shared with me that he had had a traumatic experience in his background when he was 8 years old. And what had happened was there was a fire in their home, and Greg was the oldest of 3 children, and he dragged his 2 siblings out into the driveway, and then went into his parents' bedroom and dragged them out of bed. The fire started in their bedroom, and onto the driveway. And evidently, some neighbor had called the ambulance, and just before the ambulance came and took his parents to the hospital, the last words Greg ever heard his father speak were, "God damn it, Greg, get back to bed." And he struggled because of that. He had anxiety, he had panic attacks, and all I knew to do was to care for him, to love him, to be present, to pray with him and for him and get into God's word. And the only other thing I could think of was to suggest that he talk to our local pastor, which he did, and that was somewhat helpful. And the pastor recommended a book by a Christian counselor back at that time called, I think it was The Art of Learning to Love Yourself by Cecil Osborne. And in the appendix, he talked about this group, this ministry that he had, this work that he had called Yoke Fellows, which was based on primal scream therapy in a Christian fashion somehow. And the whole notion, at least that back then, or at least what I understood it to be, is that as you relive and cry out the pain, it's released and you're released from it. So I didn't know. I thought, if I'm all for whatever helps my friend, my loved one. he went there, came back. He went there with a little bit of insurance money that his parents provided, and came back and said, yeah, kind of thought it helped. But what he had to do is every time he felt the anxiety coming on, he had to leave wherever we were and scream into that and get it out and then come back to. And I remember thinking, I don't get that. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. If the whole primal scream thing is to release the pain, you shouldn't have to redo it.
Yeah.
And so evidently it didn't work as well as Greg needed it to, and we hoped it to. And so the next summer he went to Janoff's clinic. He was the guy that originated this out in California. And Ruthie and I were off at a summer training camp with the Navigators. And we came back to the news that while Greg was there, he had taken his life. About that same time, our state director for the Navigators, Bill Tell, brought Larry Crabb and his wife Rachel were coming to Stratford Park Bible Chapel in Champaign, which is where he attended when he was a student at the University of Illinois, to do a marriage retreat. And kind of did double duty. Bill Tell, our state director, was a member there in their assembly. And so while Larry was doing the seminar there, he had a 4-hour seminar for us staff on a Saturday morning. And in preparation for that, Bill Tell gave us Larry's book at the time, Effective Biblical Counseling. And I didn't want to have anything to do with it. It was a book written by a Christian counselor. And so it sat on my inbox until the night before the seminar. And my resistance to reading it was, it's either going to tell me one of two things. Either take 2 verses and call me in the morning, or set aside the truth of God's word in order to swallow something that ends up with people taking their life. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. That Friday night, I read the entire book, and my sole purpose I didn't want to look stupid.
Let me just interject here. Dr. Pettit is an Enneagram 5.
Yes.
Yes. So
absolutely.
That was free.
And it wasn't what I expected. It didn't do either. And in fact, it did the opposite. It had a depth view of both people and their design and the life in the Word of God, and it combined the two. I wasn't expecting that. It was like a glass of fresh water. Ruthie and I went to the seminar. That was like a drink of living water. And at the seminar, he said that this was a 4-hour version of a 40-hour, a week-long or 2 long weekend seminar that he did for late counseling in the local church. And the moment he mentioned that, I knew that was the next step. When we went to that in Chattanooga, Tennessee, we had a choice to pay our rent or pay the tuition. We paid the tuition. And before we went, there was 4 $50 bills in our mailbox, and our rent was $200 a month. This is back in 1980. When we went there, he mentioned on the first day that he and Dan Allender were leaving private practice in Boca to begin a master's program at Grace Theological Seminary that next fall. And I knew in that moment that was our next step. So that's how it happened.
Wow, the late great Dr. Larry Crabb.
Yes.
You know, it's so interesting, and we're definitely going to head to the main part of the podcast, but it's so interesting because Dr. Crabb's legacy lives on, because I'm not sure what years those were for you, but when I was at Clearwater Christian College and my intro to psych class, and I won't cite the book here, but it was take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning, or take 2 Bible verses and call me in the morning, or as so often I say, if you've got a problem, I've got a Bible verse. There was a book written by someone very famous that people listening to this podcast trust, but it was just that it was there was no room for the humanity and the pain that the humanity that we as humans feel as a result of the fall of man, and therefore biblical counseling was just your faith isn't strong enough, you're not praying hard enough, you don't know enough Bible verses. And it really turned me off as well. And so I have such respect for Dr. Crabb. I actually ended up at that same college taking a class with a good friend of mine who is now also a psychologist, Dr. Kristen DeWitt, who turned me on to Dr. Crabb. And I've got most of what he's ever written, and I knew that he was a heavy influence on you for sure. But I know I'm, for one, am grateful that you answered that call. And so are my listeners. Well, Dr. Petit, I opened the podcast. Now the YouTube listeners are going to have to actually go to the audio version to hear a story that we are basing everything that we're talking about today. And it doesn't mean that if you're on YouTube, you're not going to understand what we're talking about today. But there was something very powerful that happened at the beginning of this year as I began my journey into healing, because you and I have been working together since 2008, and we had to start with the latest trauma. And unfortunately for me, as my listeners know, so much of that trauma continued well after my domestic violence exit and all of the things. But now we finally are able to get to, and I felt like I was able to begin to deal with some of my childhood trauma, which is what this season has been about. And you and I have been working together since 2008. I saw you in January of 2022 and told you some things that I had never told you, much less anybody else on this planet. And I had stumbled across a picture of myself as a child, and you and I wanted to do some work with little Amy, because that was where we were struggling. And, it's kind of, there's some woo-woo words out there called reparenting and things of that nature. And so I had been chasing that idea of reparenting, but I was not able to wrap my head around what that meant. And so, and we'll talk about that more as we talk, but I do. So those of you on audio, you heard the story. Those of you on YouTube, click in the link in the bio, and all you have to do is listen to the first 2 minutes to hear the story. But that experience was so incredibly powerful, and we're going to talk about it a little bit today. I count it as holy ground. But I'm just wondering, after 30 years plus of counseling, how that experience was for you.
It was awesome. And I don't know if I've stated this, but so I have, I think, an understanding of the construct of reparenting.
Can you help us? Because I'd like to understand, and so will our listeners.
So I'll help in a way that I can, because I have not studied it. I have not dug into it. So there is, in all likelihood, I'm confident that there's a lot out there that people could access, but I'm not going to be helpful with that. So it's more of a,
kind of what we did in that day in the office, right?
Right. And so the way I view that is, so Paul's prayer in Ephesians 3:14, he said, "For this reason," everything that he just written, "I kneel before the Father, from whom his whole family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches," and then he goes on from there. So my understanding of reparenting is that our Father is constantly, continually reparenting us. And he's filling in the gaps, He's touching, cleaning, clearing, healing wounds. He's setting development right. He is helping us to mature in love. So Paul's words in 1 Corinthians 13:4, when I was a child, I talked as a child, I thought as a child, I reasoned as a child. When I became mature, a man, a woman, I put childish ways behind me, and only childlike and Christ-like remain. And so, and one of the things that I'm sure we talked about the first time is our emotional brain that stores these experiences can only and always be about protection, survival, safety. So it's always working for us, but if it's working for us in old, familiar, non-updated ways, it's really not going to be helping us to thrive and to flourish. And so reparenting, if you will, is walking. So the Lord is not bound by time, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so walking with him restoratively to provide what was needed all along. So we get to participate with that.
I'd love to let that breathe. Walking with him restoratively to provide what we should have had the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
So just a little bit of research I know with reparenting, and one of the reasons why I'm so nervous about using it is because there are some aspects of it that I think that probably does not fit inside the confines of a faith-based approach to healing. But I love that, like, he is constantly working for us to make those things that should have always been always now. Amy, you're going to have to edit. Hold on, my phone's ringing. So when we talk about reparenting, I think that, like, the day that we sat in the office and the audio listeners heard the story, and I'm going to keep referring to it, much of my childhood trauma was attached to shame and dirt and uncleanliness and guilt. And I was listening to a song as I was praying right before this interview by Natalie Grant, where the lyric says, "There's nothing so dirty that you can't make worthy. I am clean. I am clean." And you just spoke to that. And I think that because the way God made us, like you said, our emotional brains do what they do. The idea of reparenting and taking care of the child, that I never ever thought about that passage in 1 Corinthians where Paul said, "When I was a child, I spoke as a child, and I put away all childish things, and then I became an adult." But when we look at the innocence of a child and how mine was taken, and so we're sitting in your office with a picture of a 7-year-old Amy, and I'm telling you things that I've never told you before that I have attached to shame, mostly sexual abuse, and as it progressed through my life from the ages 7 to 15. And literally we are using EMDR, which has been well documented also on this podcast. And so you guys, we don't have time for that today, but this was one of the reasons why that session was so effective for me to go back to, because you pointed me back to the ultimate reparenting, our Father who does want you to be like I meant you to be all along, to what you just said, right? And so the visual of it, and again, the audio listeners will get the whole story, but the visual of that board with that picture of 7-year-old Amy and my clothes were dirty. And I'm just now remembering that and the irony of that in the context of this conversation. My clothes were dirty, not greatly taken care of in the picture, clearly, and that doesn't surprise anybody. But to think of reparenting on a more macro and more important level than us trying to reparent ourselves. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. And you've given me some really good tools to take care of little Amy, like do this for little Amy, because little Amy's amygdala, for example, was damaged, not damaged, but affected, the hippocampus, all the sciencey things. And so there is this idea of reparenting, and I'm air quoting, and that way as we walk through counseling. But to think of our Father, Jesus, the star of the story, which is so often mentioned on this podcast, being the ultimate reparenting, who is moving us into a world into where all things will become new. And I just imagine us walking around heaven as children, jumping in puddles, and the street lights never come on, and we never have to go inside, and there's there's provision for us, and all of that. It's so I love that you. To me, that's what reparenting, that's the only thing that's going to stick. And do you believe that day in that office, because that day stuck? I know EMDR, I know the science of EMDR, I know why it stuck. I walked out of that office. I walked in feeling dirty. We even wrote the names on the board of how I was feeling, and I walked out feeling white as snow. One of the questions I was going to ask you is, why do you think that stuck? I think we might have just answered that question, but could you expound?
Yes. So there's two reasons that stuck, an outside reason and an inside reason. So the outside reason is, as far as I can discern and distill, and this is certainly true for memory reconsolidation, which is a part of what we're doing. We're opening up an old memory that's been stored a certain way, and we're providing a new true message, both in picture and word form, that provide the emotional brain with a transformative new meaning experience. And I think I may have mentioned this the last time, the example of being out on a walk, and you and three friends, and you're just enjoying the stroll, enjoying the conversation. You turn a corner, and all of a sudden you stop dead in your tracks, and your arms go out, and you stop your companions in your tracks. Well, all of your cortices are going to be offline because you just got hijacked by your amygdala, because you perceive some kind of threat, and even you wouldn't know what. All three of you were like, what just happened, including you. And then because you're immobilized, you're safe, your cortex would come back online and would join your emotional brain, and you would all of a sudden realize that right before that happened, you saw something out of the corner of your eye, something long and squiggly on the side of the road. Your emotional brain, based on prediction error to keep you safe, read that as snake, commandeered your body, you commandeered your friends. Thank you, emotional brain. Yay. Now we're safe. And all of you look over and you realize, yes, you did see something long and squiggly, but you see the picture of a stick, not a snake. You hear the word stick, not snake. And your emotional brain has a, wait, what? Oh, sticks, at least laying on the side of the road can. In fact, if you and your friends had seen either a root, a vine, a hose, or a stick, all four of those, any of those, would provide that transformative new meaning experience that would help your brain to go, wait, what? Yeah. Oh, yeah. So that's the outside part of it. That's the mechanism. The inside part of it is you were touched by the Spirit of God in a restorative, transformative way. So that part of your brain is different than it was before that time.
It's probably even structurally different, right? Yes. Yeah. Because you talked a lot of,
if we could dive deep into that, we would see, holy cow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting because I want to read this. So YouTube listeners are going to see me looking down because I don't want to get this wrong. But the amygdala, we're not going to go into a whole lot of science today because we've done that before. But the amygdala is really important. And I want to give people hope, just like Dr. Petit just did, because that day in his office, because I had the visual of a 7-year-old Amy, and I'm sitting across from you as actually, I think it was late last year because I was 49 because I journaled it. So 49-year-old Amy was staring at 7-year-old Amy. And to your point about the stick, so something about the visual in my brain, being able to reconsolidate and all the things. And again, we're not going to get into the science of that, but I do want people to understand that, even because I saw this graphic the other day and I'm not sure how I feel about it. And so I wanted to ask you about it, but it was a doctor who specializes in trauma and anxiety, although he's an MD. But the graphic read, the amygdala never forgets anything that has hurt you. And like I said, there's episodes that we go into the science of this, but I kind of read that when I first saw it as, great, I'm never going to live a life without remembering all of the pain. And because we're talking about childhood trauma, I know that there are listeners out there that feel like they're going to live the rest of their lives remembering the pain. Never forgets, So what we did that day was pretty much reprogramming my amygdala. Is that correct?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes. And there's a whole new neuronal network in your brain that is connected and flowing that wasn't there before.
Absolutely, because now when I think about those abuses, the night before last, actually, you and I had a session a couple of days ago. That night, I had a dream about the prison room. First time in a long time, but I bounced back from it so much faster. Yeah. Even in my dream, like when I was walking into the prison room, I was 7. And I was sad, but yet somehow my adult brain knew, but that was then, this is now, but let's walk in. It gave me the ability in that dream or flashback or whatever we want to call it, to walk through. And I have a memory of every corner of that room. And so in my dream, everybody else was behind me looking at the beautiful restorative house that was built in the 1800s. And I was in the prison room and the door was the same. But I woke up the next morning, was not activated, but was like, wow. But it was so weird, Dr. Petit, because it was almost like, and I don't want to like freak people out, but it was like I saw that same picture that we hung up in your office that day, and I saw another little version of Amy holding her hand and going, let's go visit this place that caused you so much pain because we can now.
Yes, because it's over. And it didn't mean what it felt like it meant. And all things are being made new. Yay.
Yeah, it was amazing. And so that's real-time information. It literally happened. I saw you 48 hours ago, and that night I had that dream.
That is
and I just, and so it does lead me into this because it even kind of answers my own question. But I have well-meaning people that love me. They love me. They love me. They love me. I'm so grateful for my community. Constantly, people are telling me to show compassion for yourself. Stop being so hard on yourself. Stop the negative talk. And I got to be honest with you, before that session that we had, when somebody said that to me, that felt like a physics problem. Like I would much rather figure out quantum physics than to how to show compassion for myself. I'm a wordsmith without words to say things nicely about myself. And it is something that I still struggle with today. But after that session, when I walked out with the truth in my mind that I'm the precious daughter of the Most High God, clean, not fatherless, not an orphan, not damaged goods, not a throwaway kid. This is what I want for my listeners. People that aren't as far along in my journey and their journey. Do you have any practical advice for self-compassion for adult survivors of childhood abuse? Like anything practical at all? And again, this is a nice time mid-interview to remind everyone that Dr. Petit is here for educational and entertainment purposes only, and this is not therapy. But I'm just asking your opinion on this or something that maybe has worked for you, for those people who have not had that experience that I had in your office, where I am now able to go back and go, nope, I'm clean, I'm redeemed, I'm loved, and I'm all the things. And again, you two people go to the audio, you'll hear the 2-minute story. But what are some things that child abuse, adult survivors of childhood trauma can do to show compassion for themselves? Because I know I spent 49 years trying to overcompensate all that pain and self-loathe, lots of self-loathing because I couldn't make it happen. I couldn't heal. I couldn't get it out of my amygdala. I couldn't get it reprocessed. I couldn't get it. So it felt, somebody was like, say something nice about yourself or be gracious to yourself. And to us, without the help that I got in your office that day, it's a physics problem. Is there something even so simple that my listeners can grab onto?
So, I'm pretty sure last time we did this, we talked about the 4 colors, right?
I'd love to talk about that again.
Okay. But I think what might be different is there's kind of a new way of talking about it. In fact, one of the colors has changed from yellow to gold. So that would be okay to...
I would love that, because when we did it on the initial episode, the audio is not near as good as it is now. And so this is not only for adult survivors of childhood abuse, but this is for anybody who is in an activated, anxious state. This is beautiful. Everyone stop what you're doing, because this is an unbelievable visual way to calm things down and show compassion for yourself.
Yeah, so this is going to be a bit of a picture and a story answer to your question, but it will end with a direct answer to your question. So it's helpful to think in terms of 4 colors. I wanted to just circle back to something you said earlier about your what's changed in your dream and I believe this is something that we talked about, about the emotional brain, that one of the things that it does, it takes a snapshot of a worst part of the experience, and then it writes, like with a Sharpie, it writes meaning, like dirty, worthless, damaged goods, throwaway goods. And so there's 2 things there. There's a frozen frame that we just keep revisiting. And that's counterintuitive to our rational brain of, why are you taking a snapshot of that? We don't want to remember this. We want to forget this and move on. And the emotional brain, again, being all only about protection and safety and survival, will say, are you kidding me right now? If I forget this, you have no idea. Literally all hell will break loose.
Yep.
So it takes a snapshot, and this is why you rationally, you're not still 7. You haven't been 7 for 43
years. I had to do the math.
And you can do the math. Right? So, but your emotional brain in those places hasn't gotten that message yet, among other things. And so that's where the reprocessing helps the emotional brain to get the message that it needs. And then, so every storyline follows this thread. So, and then, now. And so the frozen frame, we want to weave that storyline. So that happened. So this happened, and this is true. Then, like you can tell the story, then we got to revisit that intentionally, reparent 7-year-old you. And now this is what you were. So the frame is unfrozen. The movie's continued in real time, that it's now updated, that in real time you are clean, right? I love how in John 13, when Jesus is washing the disciples' feet, he said, you're all clean except one. You just need your feet washed. Can you imagine Peter hearing that? Wait, I'm clean? Yeah, you can imagine, because you are.
You're blowing my mind, actually. I never even thought about that.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? So the 4 colors, red, green, blue, and gold. That's the change. It used to be yellow, it's now gold. So I'm picturing a diagram, one-page diagram that in my mind, and on the top it says processing, in quotes, the H out of threat. Because whenever our emotional brain experiences a threat, it gets activated, whether it's real or perceived. And our color for activation or reactivity is red. Right now, we're in the green. So green represents the mode that our brain and mind can be in, that's resting, responsive, receptive. It's like green, like the Good Shepherd, the meadows that he causes us to lie down in. It's where we desire to be. It's where he desires us to be. And it's where we are right now, as we're having a meaningful, purposeful conversation. Not only that, but we believe that Jesus is right here in the space between us, because he said he would be when we do this. When two or more gather in his name, he's right here with us, with healing in his heart, with help in his hands. And yet, while we're in the green, if somebody were to knock menacingly at either of our doors, guess where we're going? We're going red.
Yeah.
And it would only mean two things. And we wouldn't know if somebody's out to get us or if somebody's in desperate need of help. But it wouldn't matter, because
Right.
threat is threat. We would go red, and it would only mean two things about us. It would mean that we're human and we're healthy. We were made to go red when we experience a threat. Yeah. So, and we want to go red when we experience a threat. If somebody is chasing after me, I want all the adrenaline. I want the cortisol to take my rational brain, my prefrontal cortex offline. I want to get strong and I want to get safe. I don't want to be green if somebody's chasing me.
Right. Yeah. You don't want to be chilling out on the green pastures. Yeah.
But I also want a way to get back to the green when I'm not being chased, when it's not just a perceived threat, but it's an echo threat. It's something that's surfaced. So what this is a model for is really two things. One is emotional regulation. It's a way of getting from, it's a way of normalizing the red. Of course, I'm human and I've experienced some things, so of course I'm going to go red. But it's a way to get back from the red to the green. And so it's a way of emotional regulation, but it's also a way of trauma clearing and healing. So it combines both together. So imagine a blue circle. That's the blue color. So blue is the place of healing. It's the place of integration. It's the place of safety. It's the place of, it's the connection between the seen and the unseen, right? So right now, we're in our homes, in our locations, we can see each other through Zoom, and simultaneously, we are seated with Christ in the heavenlies.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow. Mind blowing.
That's that truth connects us with the seen and the unseen. Both are true right here, right now. So that's the blue. And also, if we could represent the blue kind of on our forehead being like a blue circle on our forehead, where integration occurs in our brain, between the hemispheres, between the parts of the brain, the cortex, limbic system, brainstem, out the body and into life. That's the blue. And the other thing it represents is our window of tolerance. Now, if you were to Google window of tolerance, you would see squares and rectangles, but I prefer circles and round things, or a portal, if you will. But
a portal. Ooh.
Yes, that's how I view it. And so if you looked at the experience above being pulled out of center into the red, so you've got now you've got the green inside the blue, you've got the red outside the blue, and you've got the gray and the black outside of the red, right? So that kind of represents storms and that we've been through, or even that we're going through. And so if you were looking online and you saw a window of tolerance, you would see what's above it called hyperarousal. So that's getting agitated, getting anxious, getting irritated. That in more intense forms, that's flipping our lid or freaking out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's human to get up there, but we just want a way back as quickly and as effectively as we can. So you would see hyperarousal, and your rational brain would go, wow, okay, that's a really big term. I like that. But in yellow on top of the red, so the emotional brain can get it, there's just two little words. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. The emotional brain goes, I know what that means. I've experienced that. Then on the bottom, the big term would be hypoarousal, and that's getting too low, getting too sad, uber sad, feelings of despair, of hopelessness, of helplessness, of shame, of guilt, depression, despair. That would be hypoarousal. So we're drawn out of center by those experiences. We want a way back up, right? And then if you
into the portal.
Yes, into the portal, yes. So if you imagine then, if you're looking at the paper on the right, which represents the future, so the two little emotional brain words for hypoarousal would be, oh no, or oh crap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or some version of that.
Yeah, or some version of that. Then off to the right, that can drag us out of center with respect to the future, are just two little simple words, what if? And that's where fear commingles with possibility. What if this happens? And what if this happens? And what if this doesn't happen? And again, it's human to get out there, but there's no life out there. And we want a way back to center. And then what can drag us off to the other side, to the left on the piece of paper, would be the if onlys. If only I hadn't done that. If only I had done this. If only this hadn't happened. And so that's where you get more into regret and the other little emotional brain words. So up here is what do I got here? Is boom, oh, down, oh no is doom, what if is loom, and if only is gloom. And on the green on the inside, we've got room and bloom.
Wow.
Right?
That's new. That's updated from what we've had before.
Yeah, those are words of the emotional brain. So imagine if we find ourselves in the red, it caught up in
childhood, like a childhood flashback or something like that.
Childhood flashback or a present experience that is connected with a childhood meaning. So let's say, just for example, we're down in the oh no, the doom, the sense of. So wherever we are, we're going to come back to that one. But wherever we are, imagine when we're aware of that we see right at our feet a golden bridge. And that golden bridge, there's 6 planks that walk us across the blue and back into the green.
Wow.
And we're going to come back to the 6 planks. But let me illustrate it. So not too long ago, last year, I said something to someone I care about. It was well intended, but it was poorly aimed and poorly timed, and I hurt my friend. And thankfully and graciously, they made me aware of that and provided opportunity for me to do what I could to set that right, which I was eager to do and so grateful for. And I did. Afterwards, I couldn't shake it. I was down in the oh no. How could I have done that? How could I have said that? How old am I? I'm 67 years old. I've got 38 years of experience. Yeah, I'm a good counselor. I've got a lot to offer. That was a rookie error. And it just kept getting louder and stronger, and I couldn't shake it. It would drag me out of center every chance it got. So the Golden Bridge shows up. And the first plank on the Golden Bridge they're all questions. It's 6 questions. The first plank is, what does this feel like it means? And what left out of me is all is lost. That's what it felt like it meant. All is lost. And so now, oftentimes, what we tend to do, either with loved ones or with ourselves, is we tend to try to counter that. No, nothing's awesome. It was an honest mistake. It's human to make a mistake. We'll try to rational brain help that. There's no help in that. We stay with it. The next question is this familiar? Have I experienced this before, and when? And when I asked that question, my mind went back to a moment when I was 7 years old. And it was something that I'd already thought about, but I hadn't accessed it through the felt meaning. So I was taken back there. And what it was my dad was a life insurance salesman for Northwestern Mutual for all my grown up years. And this Saturday, I got to go into the office with my dad. And I felt important. I felt special. I felt big. I got to sit in his swivel chair and look at all these manuals that I just knew my dad had memorized, and got to see where the sausage was made. And then there was a little metal 2-drawer file cabinet that had a knob on it that looked like it just needed a 7-year-old to push it in. So I did. And when it clicked, my dad, in my little 7-year-old mind, erupted. What was that? That wasn't the file cabinet. What did you do? That I don't have a key to that. Those are my important files. Oh my goodness. All's lost. I had single-handedly ruined my dad's career. He would never sell another policy. We wouldn't eat anymore. We would go homeless. We would lose everything we had. And guess whose fault it was? This guy. So, and again, we touch on that, and we want to go rational brain to talk us out of that. That doesn't meet the need. Next plank. What would I love to experience instead of that? Nothing came until a couple of hours later. This was just one morning when man, I'm not shaking this. I need help, Lord. I was with a client, and in that moment, I heard these words come out of my mouth to the client, all is well. And when I heard those words, they resonated. The Spirit just, that's what I longed to hear. And then the next question is, what message does my emotional brain need to receive in order to heal, clear, update? That was the message. And then the next question is, what picture does my emotional brain need to see? Remember the stick? Okay, I need to see either stick, hose, vine, or root. What picture does my emotional brain need to see to receive that message? All is well. And a favorite picture that the Lord has given me for years. I've got this fireplace in my mind. It's the fireplace of the Father's love. There's a dining room table, and the Lord is always sitting at it, just like he said he would. He told me that in Revelation 3:20 when I was 18. He's never left, and it's my come to him, come as I am. And I sensed an invitation that I can put my mistakes on the table and my feelings about those mistakes, and he's going to take them and not just forgive me, but he's going to reweave that in a way that only he could do to bring in a unique good for that person and for me. And now that I'm telling the story, maybe for others. That was the image. So I saw myself taking that mistake, that misspoke word, and whatever damage it may have done, and the meaning that it had for me, and watching the Lord just warmly smile and take that and go, well, I've got this. Watch what I do. and I was back in, then the next question is, what word does my emotional brain need to hear? Already had that. Or what song would you touched on one this morning. And then this is a question that just was added this morning, just in light of our time together. Once we step into that green and into that green pasture, the next question, I have to look, I wrote this down. In light of this now being true, what would you love to say or do? And I saw myself just skipping, carefree. He's got it. It never dragged me back out there again, just a walk. So all that to say, take his hand and walk across the Golden Bridge.
Wow. I'm sorry, I was a little mesmerized. People on YouTube can see that. I feel like I'm actually in a counseling session. I love that. And I actually have a listener who I'm going to get to draw this with the words that I love. You crack me up because I know you're also a Bible teacher. And so the alliterations and the words that sound the same and things that you and I both really share that love. But listeners, what Dr. Petit has just done for you. Now, while you may not experience the permanent, and it has been permanent, reframing of your trauma, as I did that day in his office, and as the audio listeners heard at the beginning of the podcast, the story, what he has just done for those of you who have not had the opportunity to experience what I did in his office that day. And he told, Dr. Petit shared this color picture a couple years ago, about 18 months ago on the episode that he was on. It was a little bit different. This one I love because it does allow people who can't afford counseling, who for whatever reason are living with the memories and the torture of childhood abuse in particular, I'm thinking. Shame is the thing that comes to my mind the most. And so I know for me, before that day in that office, and even now I have to catch myself, because my question to you was how, and you just beautifully said, this is how you show compassion for yourself if you've been through childhood trauma, or if you've not, if you're just living in this world right now and something has, we've seen the stick, and it could mean any number of things in 2022, and how to get out of the doom and gloom and the oh no, and out of the, get back into those green pastures. And for me, and I just think that the vision that comes to my mind in this story is Psalm 23, where I can lay down in that green pasture, and there's no fear, there's no activation. And for some of you out there who have not had the experience that I had in Dr. Petit's office, and you can come back to this podcast and listen to it. And if I can get somebody to put it in a visual, artistic form for you, if we can, when, for example, let's say I didn't have that experience in your office, and I had that dream about the prison room that I was locked into as a child, I would have this tool, this compassionate tool to show myself, okay, Amy, you're not in the green anymore. Let's walk over the bridges and let's ask these questions. What does it mean? What do I want it to mean? What picture comes to my mind? Or for me, most of my listeners know how much I love music. And again, I cited that song at the beginning. What gets me back to the green pastures where I can lay down by the still waters and be oh so nourished. And so the whole purpose of this season was for those of you out there all across the world. We're on 6 continents. For some reason, nobody listens to us in Antarctica, but we are on 6 continents, and there are so many people out there without access to a Dr. Petit, to science, like we've talked about. We've used some fancy words here, the amygdala, which is God's way of protecting you from danger, whether it's a stick. We've used the cheetah analogy. You can go back on in the first season and listen to Dr. Pettit's beautiful cheetah analogy about that. But I think the way you just answered that question is the way we show compassion for ourselves as childhood trauma survivors is pay attention and find a system like this, if it's not this, something like this, that gets you back to baseline. You talked a little bit about window of tolerance there, and just in case a couple people people don't know what that is, by definition, window of tolerance is anything that pushes us outside of our brain's ability to regulate and not push us into activation. Am I correct, kind of, on that definition?
Yeah, window of tolerance is what keeps that from happening.
Right.
When it happens, whether it's a flooding or a flashback or a memory or a fiery dart, yeah, and because there were some fiery darts involved there. You're the worst counselor, the worst human being, the worst friend on the planet.
Right.
So, okay, if I just add to that a little bit.
Absolutely.
Okay, so there's three, talking about filling in the gaps, providing what was missing, and then removing what shouldn't have been there. It helps to view the three basic needs of a child are for protection, nurturance, and guidance. And then on a concentric circle beyond that, it would be involvement, participation, love, help, wisdom, truth, or development. So like we talked about at the beginning with 1 Corinthians 13, so the removal of, or the sending away of childish ways, what remains are childlike and Christ-like. Yeah, it's not like, okay, no, I'm an adult, and we get to be the way he intended us to be all along. And so there's an acronym called COAL, COAL, that Dr. Dan Siegel came up with. And so this is like an intrapersonal weave. So let me just state it and then expand it a little bit. So the first C is curiosity. Huh, that's interesting. I wonder what that's about. I wonder where that came from. I wonder what makes this so strong for me. Why such a strong reaction? And then O is open, being open to whatever comes up. And then whatever comes up, to respond to it with acceptance, of course. Yeah, that's human. That makes sense. And then the last L word is love, is providing a loving response to ourselves as that comes up. I think it's helpful to contrast that with a bad form of COAL, because this is what often happens. So the C would stand for critical, contemptuous, and condemning, right?
Yeah.
So this past year, Oprah wrote a book with Dr. Richard Perry, psychiatrist, and the title of the book is called "What Happened to You?" And their whole point of the book is to get in between what typically is the question that is either inside the person, or people ask about, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with me? What happened to you? So that question helps. So what's wrong with me, or for me, what the heck is wrong with me? I mean, come on, let's get serious. I got to figure this out and get rid of this. So that's the C. The O is ostracizing, where we cut ourselves off from parts of ourselves. Just get over it. Forget that, leave it behind. And sadly, we can misuse scripture on ourselves and on one another to do that. We can take Paul's words about forgetting what lied behind and use it to ostracize ourselves rather than actually working with the Spirit to find a real way to do that. And then the A is attacking, accusing, arguing, or even assaulting. Yeah. Oh, and trying to annihilate. I mean, that would be the ultimate A. And then L, and you mentioned this at the beginning, is loathing. Yeah. So add that to the bridge and picture our high priest walking across the bridge with the good coal, and we get to participate in that. And so what I would add on the good side to the C would be not just curiosity, but compassion.
Mm.
Yeah. And the O, I would still say open. And the A, so the A, in addition to acceptance, the next word I would attach there would be awe.
Mm.
Standing in awe of one of Ruthie and my favorite quotes says this: here is what we seek, not just for others, but for ourselves. That was parenthetical. Here's what we seek: a compassion that stands in awe of what the poor have to carry, rather than in judgment of how they carry it.
Wow.
Yeah, and that includes the poor in spirit. That includes the impoverished parts of ourselves. Standing in awe of, and then the third word, and this one just came this morning, is the word agape. Our mouths go open, which, and the reason I love that word is because pronounce that a little bit. Yeah.
I know you will.
Yes. Isn't that fun?
It's imperative for yeah.
Yeah, and this is the fun part of being a 5, is getting to participate in things like this.
Well, and given these aha moments, like I've been in counseling with you for a long time, and this morning I've gotten all of these aha moments, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, tonight I'm going back and listening to this because there's some things that you've said, particularly on this compassion for ourselves. And guys, this is for everybody. You do not have to have experienced childhood trauma to walk yourself through compassionately over that golden bridge with our high priest back to the green pastures where you can lie down. And I always think of that passage in Psalm 23, where the sheep can lie down. We know sheep are the dumbest animals on the planet, but that's not why they're lying down. They're lying down because they are being protected by the great shepherd, right? Or you can interchange the high priest as we talk about the portal. I just love that portal. And so what Dr. Petit has provided for us today is exactly what happened for me that day in that office. And so for the listeners under the sound of my voice, and for under the sound of Dr. Petit's voice, I hope that you will take the time to listen to this on one speed, maybe come back and listen to it, read the transcripts, and implement this into your life as you chase healing. I had another therapist on the podcast that said at one point to me, your trauma is not your fault, but your healing is your responsibility. And as unfair as that may sound, and I'm not even quite sure I 100% agree with it, I believe that my healing is ultimately in the hands of the star of the story. However, if the star of the story gives me access to help, like a counselor or like a podcast or like a book, Dr. Dan Siegel, by the way, is somebody that I highly recommend. A lot of the stuff that I've learned from books from him. But what we've tried to do for you here today is provide for you ways to, quote, reparent, if you will. Neither of us really have researched what that means in the actual psychological world because that's not important to us. What's important to us is that you And you hit on something, Dr. Pettit, that I want to make sure the listeners heard, is what children need. There's 3 things that they need. And even for me, I want to move forward and make sure that as an adult that I am meeting those needs, because then I'm going to be less likely to be self-critical. I'm going to be less likely to go, why? Because I'll do something like, can't find my glasses. I'm so stupid. Why can't I find my glasses? I'm so dumb. I can't, why do I do this? Why don't I put them in the same place? And I begin to indict myself. And now I'm out of the portal. I'm not anywhere near the golden bridge. I'm certainly not looking to my high priest or my great shepherd. And so I hope that what we've provided for you here today is going to yield for some of you the peace and the healing from childhood trauma as we close out this season. Well, Dr. Pettit, you've been amazing as always. I do want to give you the last word as we close out the podcast. To anyone who is listening, you and I get to speak all the time, but I'm always grateful for words that come to me. But that's not really the purpose of this question, though I know you well enough to know that will be included. But I would love for you just to give parting words to the Wednesday with Watson listeners. That is a mouthful. To encourage them. If you have experienced particularly childhood trauma, only because that's what we're focusing on, but any trauma at all, we have really tried to help you today. And I hope that has happened. And so Dr. Pettit would love to give you the last words on the microphone.
Let's continue to join hands with Jesus and one another, walking across the Golden Bridge, working with the Father, partnering with the Spirit, to fill in the gaps, clean and heal the wounds, restore healthy development, release Christ-like, childlike freedom and love.
And may it be so. And may it be so. And guys, remember, there's nothing so dirty that he can't make worthy. He has washed you with his blood. You are clean. Amen. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Dr. Pettit.
Thank you for inviting me, Amy. This has been a treat.
It's always my pleasure, and I know that my listeners will benefit from it. Well, guys, thank you so much. We are at the very end of season 3. It has been a journey. If this is the first time that you have heard a Wednesdays with Watson episode, I would love it if you would go back to the very beginning where you can hear my passion, my story, and you can even hear throughout the episodes, particularly solo episodes, how I have healed, because it's possible. There's such hope in Jesus. There's such hope in the star of the story. There's such hope in community. There's such hope in counseling. And while we're talking about counseling, that is the mission of this podcast, is to provide funds for pro bono counseling for people who cannot afford it. If you are interested in helping us in that journey, just click on that Contact Amy link at the very top of the show notes. Coming up in season 4 in September, we'll have a couple tweener episodes, but coming up in September is an entire season on forgiving trauma makers, and we hope that you will join us. Until then, you know that I never leave a microphone without saying the same words over and over. I mean it with every single fiber of my beating heart. You are seen, you are known, you are heard, you are loved, and you're oh so valued. See you guys in 2 weeks.